welcome. You're watching Rebooting India on NDTV. I'm Shweta Rajpal Kohli. Finance Minister Arun Jaitley today gave final touches to his budget document. The budget clearly being described as the most important one we have seen since 1991. And a day ahead of the budget, the economic survey was also tabled in Parliament by the Finance Minister that clearly said that India is in a sweet spot. It's a moment that comes rarely in the history of the nation. So while the economic survey has painted a very rosy picture of the Indian economy, are there too many thorns that we simply cannot ignore? That's something we will debate on the show today. But first, a quick look at the big highlights of the economic survey, which is essentially just a report card of the economy. The economic survey pegs the growth rate at over 8% for next fiscal, saying that India could grow anything between 8.1 to 8.5%. But that number obviously coming on the back of the revisions in the GDP formula that came in last month. The economic survey also says time for big bang reforms has come, but we will discuss that in greater detail also, because the chief economic advisor himself says that for India to expect big bang reforms is unreasonable, saying that yes, India is on the path of double-digit growth and that it has reached a sweet spot, a very rare moment in the history of the nation. It talks about the objective of wiping every tear from every eye, really taking forward the inclusiveness agenda, saying that poverty control is one major theme and aim of the Modi government. Talking about prices and inflation, it says inflation is clearly showing a declining trend, something which will continue next year as well, especially owing to the fact that there will be nearly a 27% drop that we're factoring next year in the overall fuel bill compared to this year. The government, of course, says it remains committed to the fiscal consolidation path, which means reining in the fiscal deficit, higher revenues, lower expenditure. Also talking about empowering states, the economic survey said fiscal federalism will be enhanced, but there is also a need to balance Make in India and Skilling India. The other big debate, of course, is whether growth can be fueled by public investment or by private investment at a time when private investment clearly hasn't kicked off. The economic survey says, yes, public investment is important, but only in the short run because it can't substitute private investment. It was also a day when we saw the market soaring ahead of the budget, but what will happen tomorrow remains the critical question. You've got the Sensex there up 473 points, a fantastic run up a day ahead of the budget, but tomorrow remains the crucial day. Remember, the budget is being presented as per tradition on the 28th of February, but because it happens to be a Saturday, there's a special market opening that has been planned, so stock markets will remain open tomorrow. Trading will be on, of course, to factor in the impact of the budget. We'll just bring up our panel and the special discussion, but first a look at two important factors that came out of the interaction with the chief economic advisor. First, of course, is whether India's economy is roaring or not. Well, the chief economic advisor had a note of caution saying, well, yes, India is recovering, but the economy is clearly not surging, and the 8% plus numbers seem to give an impression that it is a surging economy, but India is not a tiger yet.
They say there are lies, damn lies in statistics, but in this case I would say, there are uncertainties, puzzles and statistics, and this one is very much in the nature of an uncertainty and a puzzle, because the level of the number, especially the 6.4 number that came out for 13-14 is still something that we're trying to understand here. So my conclusion here is to say that the balance of evidence shows that India is still a recovering economy, not a surging economy that can be, thought of as a tiger as yet. So if you think about India today, it's neither in crisis and it's a kind of vibrant, frustratingly vibrant democracy with all these multiple checks and balances. So I think the standard, that big bang reform standard is, I think, an unreasonable standard to hold. This is a window of opportunity where there's a political mandate for change, and I think this opportunity should be seized in India.
All right, let me go straight across to the panel. Sajid Chinoy, India economist JP Morgan joins us. Ajit Ranade, chief economist, Aditya Birla Group, GVL Narasimha Rao, spokesperson of the BJP, and Balachandra Mungekar, Rajya Sabha MP of the Congress. If I could go first straight across to the economists to get their sense on the state of the economy before we get to the political side of it. Mr. Ranade, you just heard what the chief economic advisor had to say. On one hand, he's pegging India's growth at between 8.1 to 8.4% for next fiscal. But he's also warning there, saying that India is not a surging economy. It's still a recovering economy. Aren't we getting a very confusing picture on the state of the economy?
Yes, Shweta, in fact, he himself admitted that the numbers which were put out recently by the Central Statistical Organization, the CSO, actually have created more confusion because they changed the base year from 2004-05 to 2011-12. But in doing so, they pegged last year's economic growth at 7.1%. And in fact, because of that, this year's growth will be 7.4 and next year will be probably 8.1. But these numbers are not making sense, because the underlying economic momentum is not the kind which we associate with an 8% growth. Investment is still not picking up. Look at the banking sector, it still has stressed assets. The level of NPAs is high. New credit is not flowing. So of course we are in much better shape than most other economies in the world. Europe is nearly in recession, Japan is in recession, Brazil, Russia. So compared to that, India's even 5% growth would look good, but it doesn't quite square with the 8% number. But even the CEA, he himself has acknowledged some confusion. It's written in the economic survey. But be that as it may, I think the outlook is definitely for a much stronger growth next year.
Okay, a stronger growth, but a quick point there, Mr. Ranade. Is it safe to say that the 8% growth number for the Indian economy is a misleading number?
Yes, I would say that given the confusion between the two series, the old series and the new series, we should not get focused too much on the number itself, which is 8%. We should look at the incremental progress. Compared to this year, can we expect at least a 1 percentage point higher growth rate next year? So let's measure it in relative terms, that is compared to this year to next year.
Okay, relative terms is important. That's a point that even the chief statistician of India has said, don't look at that number. But Sajid Chinoy, how do you ignore the growth number? Isn't that the one number that we always watch out for? It's the one number that really tells you the state of the economy. Yes, we understand that you economists will look for the fiscal deficit number, you'll look for the fiscal deficit target for the next 2 years. But when you talk about India being the fastest growing economy in the world, fastest growing large economy in the world, it's really pegged on that growth rate number. And that's why today's economic survey putting out that number of 8.1 to 8.4% is extremely important, because once again it gives the sense that India is actually a roaring economy, to quote Dr. Arvind Subramaniam.
Yeah, and I think Dr. Subramaniam was very correct in saying we're not a roaring economy, we're not a tiger just as yet. I think, some of these statistics can be very misleading, Shweta. If you look at the tone and tenor of the economic survey, I thought it was a very good balance. There was no self-congratulatory behavior that we're the fastest growing economy in the world. Instead, they listed out what some of these economic constraints are. I think for policymakers, whether it's the central bank or the Ministry of Finance, they'll be much less focused on what headline GDP growth is and much more focused on what do you do to revive investment. And I think the focus in the budget tomorrow is going to be that the prospects for private investment, Ajit spoke about the banking sector, for example, we can talk about land acquisition or implementation bottlenecks, don't look that rosy. And therefore, what's very important tomorrow for the budget is not to rest on these laurels about 8% growth. It is to actually begin a process of rebalancing, that we'll have to significantly increase the public financing of infrastructure, and therefore we want to see much more capital investment of the budget tomorrow. And for that to be sustainable over the next 2 or 3 years, while the private sector recovers and the banking system recovers, you will need to see fiscal space being created from subsidies being rationalized. So I would argue that tomorrow's budget is perhaps more important than ever before, irrespective of these sharp GDP revisions.
Right, a budget that is more important than ever before, and that's why all eyes clearly on what the finance minister will finally do tomorrow. Let me now take across that point to the political panelists there. GVL Narasimha Rao, you just heard the economic view. You've also heard the chief economic advisor to the finance ministry there saying, putting out a word of caution, saying that those statistics are misleading. At the same time and again, we've got top politicians, including the prime minister, including the finance minister, taking credit for those growth numbers, calling India the fastest growing economy. Don't you think that we need to put in that caveat, that note of caution, even in those political statements?
No, but even if you account for the changes in the numbers because of methodological changes, I think we are still growing, but not at a very high rate, but certainly for us to take off. I think we believe the economy is now in a takeoff phase, and with low inflation consistently for several months, and also the investment cycle picking up, and the kind of policies for Make in India and many other policies this government had unleashed, FDI in defense, FDI in other sectors. I think the government certainly is hopeful that this trend will, you see 7.4 for the 14-15, going up to 8.4 is a percentage point growth. I think what this government believes in is not to overstate or not to overpromise. Maybe promise on a reasonable note and deliver more. I think to that extent you should give the credit to the government for not being overly stating numbers like Chidambaram had done in repeated budgets. The manner in which window dressing of fiscal deficit was done in the last 2 financial years. That is not, so the government is being extremely honest with the numbers, and the government is projecting, giving us sort of a trend, giving us some kind of a
but that's not the reaction we got.
Futuristic direction.
Right, Mr. Rao, but that's not the reaction we got from other political parties today who've clearly called this nothing else but lies, damn lies and statistics, saying it is window dressing of numbers. Although we do know that the revisions in GDP was a very credible exercise which is undertaken by every economy. We do understand that. But let me go across to Mr. Balachandra Mungekar of the Congress. Sir, whatever said and done, the one thing that just about everyone seems to agree is that the kind of mess that the economy that the BJP has inherited, it will take them a long time to actually rectify things and turn the economy around. And a large part is really the legacy that the UPA has left behind.
See, I am not commenting from politics point of view. I'm reacting strictly from political economy and statistics and economics point of view. As you rightly mentioned, whatever one may say, but rate of growth is extremely important indicator in what direction economy is growing. Second important point is, as it was mentioned earlier by one speaker, these economic surveys creating more confusion. Economic survey should be the basic factual statement and giving the economic status of the economy. Now, so far this 7.4% rate of growth is concerned for 2014-15. They have changed the base year from 2004-5 to 2011 and 12.
Right.
And clearly while spelling out this rate of growth, starting from 11 and 12 to 14-15, in the last paragraph they clearly have mentioned we should exercise tremendous amount of caution while comparing and interpreting this rate of growth. Right. Third point is, the chairman of the Statistical Commission, Mr. Pranab Sen, himself has said that this is a tremendous amount of confusion. Fourth, Reserve Bank of India, Governor and Reserve Bank of India set up, which is the major repository of economic wisdom, they also are not accepting this. And the most important point in this matter is...
Let me take that point forward, sir, to the economists there who will give us a better understanding of what could be the ramifications. Mr. Ranade, you've got a situation when top economists, including the chief economic advisor, says, I'm puzzled. He didn't say, I don't accept these numbers, but he says, now this is the only number we can go by. We've got top economists there, including you, saying, you know what, we cannot take that absolute number. We have to look at the relative growth and the change of growth. Isn't there a case for India to really relook at that entire exercise? Because something clearly has gone wrong.
That's right.
Mr. Ranade.
No, Shweta, I think this change of base year is done. This change of base year is done by all economies, and this is routine. It's done every few years. What it does is there is slight revision. Most of the countries, the revisions are in 0.1 or 0.2%. This time, one of the revision numbers ended up being in 2 percentage points, and that is very unusual, and that's the source of confusion.
Which is the reason why
but
the
let's just
question
leave
marks
that aside. Let us examine what.
So that's the reason why
Yes,
one is questioning,
look at
because
the,
you know, if you've got
growth drivers, the determinants of growth.
Right, so go ahead.
So the determinants of growth, as the survey itself points out right in the beginning, that there is a benign external environment for India. That means they are referring to the steep fall in energy prices, oil and coal and so on, which are one of the major ingredients to growth, economic growth. Secondly, the electoral mandate of the current government, which makes it possible to pursue certain radical and bold reforms.
Right.
This combination of the two, the benign external environment combined with the political will of this government, makes it possible to push growth to a higher level, as I said, at least by a percentage point higher. Now, whether we are starting on a base of 5 or 5.5 or 7, that's immaterial so long as we get an increment of at least 1 to 1.5% growth next year.
Okay.
I think it's more important to look at what magnitude of increase of growth we are going to get between this year and next year.
Okay, I'll just come back to you, Mr. Mangekar, but if I could quickly take that point forward to Sajid Chinoy. Sajid, important point there made by Mr. Rana Day is the current environment, which is something that the economic survey has also opened with today. The benign external environment, which essentially tells you that oil prices have collapsed to a large extent, which is a huge benefit for India. Overall, the economy, the world economy, not as bad as it was in the last few years. At the same time, a very, very strong political mandate. All of this is really leading up to the expectation of a fantastic budget that we should expect tomorrow, Big Bang one. At the same time, again, there's a conflicting view. While the economic survey uses the word Big Bang reforms, the chief economic advisor himself has said it is impossible, it's an unreasonable standard to expect that India can actually unleash Big Bang reforms. So again, the contradiction there.
Yeah, I think it's an unreasonable expectation and frankly one that's not needed. I don't think India needs a 1991-like budget again. Those things only happen when you have a large macroeconomic crisis and the space for those kind of reforms open up. I want to go back to your earlier point. I think the external environment is benign, but the constraint in India's growth in the last 2 years has not been external, it's been domestic. There is no doubt that because of lower oil prices, lower food prices and inflation, consumption will pick up. But if India's growth is going to sustain over the next 2-3 years, it has to be on the back of domestic investment. And that has been stagnant for the last 3 years. Therefore, tomorrow's budget is important in 2 ways. One is you've got to actually jumpstart public investment, which has been very dormant for the last 3 years. And we have to have a credible plan for the government to actually finance more infrastructure. That for me is far more important than some grandiose reform that's going to happen after 2 or 3 years. And secondly, it's got to have a number of incentives to crowd in private investment. So for me, I'll judge the budget by that more than any headline statement.
But Big Bang or not, I know this is a term we use very often, but since it's figured so prominently in the economic survey and in the chief economic advisor's press meet today, Sajid, just a one-word answer, Big Bang or not, will tomorrow's budget be Big Bang or not?
I think it'll be determined incrementalism, not Big Bang.
Not Big Bang, but incremental. Mr. Rana, a quick word from you on that, sir.
Probably not. It's going to be, as Sajid said, Big Bang is required only when you have economic crisis. We are not in the middle of a crisis. We are in the middle of actually fairly comfortable political and economic situation, but it's not satisfactory because the growth needs to be higher.
All right, I've unfortunately run out of time, and thank you all gentlemen for joining us and sharing your views, but you've got the verdict out there coming from 2 of India's finest economists saying don't expect that Big Bang budget. I'm sorry sir, I'm really out of time. I know you had to make a point, but we've got all eyes really tomorrow on what Mr. Jaitley will do. Will he live up to all those expectations building up ahead of the budget or not? Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.